Well, this is starting to look like a recognizable 4.6 liter engine on this 95 Crown Victoria. I've got the fan belt in place and the radiator, air conditioning condenser, and the fan shroud. And all that went in really nice. It just basically is held in with these rubber isolators bolted to the radiator support. And got the transmission and cooler lines all tightened down, as well as not forgetting to connect the electric cooling fan or auxiliary fan connector. And I still have yet to add any of the fluids, so I still have to flush out the cooling system. I'm going to go ahead and flush out this cooling system one more time, even though I just did it recently. There's a YouTube video about that, but now that I have the opportunity, I'm going to go ahead and flush it one more time before I put the hoses back on. And I have to remember that everything is dry. I do have engine oil in here, never had a reason to drain that, but I have to refill the power steering fluid, of course the engine coolant, as well as the transmission fluid. And at that point, this thing will be ready for its first startup. I do have a lot of the most of the body panels loose still. You can probably see I've got the bolts taken off because that's going to give me the opportunity to align all the panels as a unit. So the header panel, this fiberglass header panel, is attached to the left and right fenders with guide dowels, so that's pretty much non-adjustable. And because that's fixed, and because I have the radiator support loosened, I can actually adjust the entire thing as a unit instead of getting one perfect and having to mess with the other side. I've got the fender gaps pretty well done, but still have to play around with getting this hood adjusted by adjusting these bolts there on either side. And I'm kind of going back and forth between the inside of the car and the outside of the car. And what I'm working on right now is the IP, or the instrument panel. And I've got the instrument cluster disassembled here. And it's just one of my pet peeves. I hate having all kinds of dust and hair and cigarette ash and all that kind of stuff all caught up behind the glass where you can't clean it, and having dirty gauges and things like that. So I've been working on these gauges and getting them all nice and clean, trying to make them look like new again. And an interesting observation I've noticed is I'm trying to also replace any burned out lights, and I've made an observation that one of those lights is darker than the other, and that's not the only one. That light right here is the illumination light, and it says such on the back of the printed circuit board. By the way, that's a dual layer printed circuit board, which is interesting. They're usually single layer. So we have illumination lights here, 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 and here, and everything else are warning lights. Now, as typical of incandescent lights, as they start to age just through normal use, they deposit material on the inside of the bulb from the filament, and that's what makes that shiny appearance. So that light, I haven't tested it yet, but the light may very well work fine, but it's going to have a low output, so I'm going to go ahead and replace that. But what's interesting is that the warning light, this particular warning light, the third warning light from the left, looks almost just as bad. If I can get it at the right angle. And that's a really good clue that something might have been wrong long term with this car. Like I said with the F250 when I got that last year, I think it was, every car has a story to tell. And this Crown Victoria is certainly no exception with the seized motor over there. And if we follow the pattern, third from the right, or third from the left, with the instrument cluster bezel, we can see that that's the check engine light. So, if I can get that in focus, The driver of this car has been driving around with a check engine light illuminated for a very, very long time. A year, 2, 3 years. It takes a long time for a light like that to start making deposits. Keep in mind that these lights are 18 years old. So it's very possible that check engine light could have been illuminated and not addressed for many years. So going back to the original engine to start the investigation, this engine, if you guys aren't aware, is locked or seized because it has valve collision. It's got bent valves on the passenger side head due to what I think is a bad timing chain tensioner in here that allowed the engine to jump time. And now that I have the complete engine and transmission assembly out as a unit, just looking at it, you can tell that the coolant likely was never changed. You've got tremendous amounts of buildup of corrosion in this heater core outlet pipe, for example. Now that it's dried up, you can see it really well. And also, you've got rust stains all down the bell housing of the transmission. And you've got rust stains inside the valley of this 4.6, right under the lower intake plenum here. And from that clue, you can deduce that the water pump hose right there blew at some point. That hose. Further supporting that conclusion is the fact that it's got a standard screw clamp on here instead of the OEM constant tension clamps, and which comes off of the water pump here, feeds the very tube we were just looking at back here through the valley of the engine to supply the heater core. So we know that's been replaced. We know that thing burst, created a coolant leak here. We know that when that happened, there was lots of corrosion in the cooling system. And in order to make that repair, the entire intake manifold assembly has to be removed, including the fuel injector assembly, to gain access to that hose down in there. And if you guys notice and jump in the video, that's my wonderful Sony Info lithium battery providing no information at all, no info, and crapping out spontaneously. So the entire intake manifold had to be removed and the repair made and everything put back together. And comparing the two engines, when I had them out, I noticed this mess right here, which is pretty obvious. That's not the factory routing of these plastic vacuum hoses just sitting up here on the throttle body like that. You got hoses jammed into places where it shouldn't be jammed into. So we've got the green hose going to this connector here, which kind of splits off into a red one, or two red ones. Then we have a red hose going to the EGR valve, and another hose just sitting here. It was like that when I got it. And if we go over here to the good engine, not sure if you guys can see. Try the night shot here. Well, you're not going to be able to see color, but those are the two hoses going down to the EGR valve. And what's really supposed to be happening is the green hose goes to the EGR valve. So, we know that the vacuum hoses here are completely misrouted. They're basically flipped around on the control valve. This is a solenoid that turns on and off this EGR valve at the right time. And these two tubes give you a pressure differential within the EGR feed pipe. and they go to this sensor right here. And this sensor feeds the PCM to tell you if the EGR system is functioning properly. And so, more than likely, this was the source of the check engine light right here. And the guy never could figure it out, or never really bothered to. Once he had the intake manifold off, he probably forgot how these hoses are routed and just stuck them on, whichever way sort of made sense. And then had the check engine light illuminated all the time and couldn't figure it out, and the engine would still run, of course, with no EGR function. Probably wouldn't run very well. And they don't really test for emissions here where I live, so not too big of a deal. So the guy probably just kept on driving it like that without a care in the world, unfortunately. And also, unfortunately, that's consistent with the way this poor car has been taken care of. For example, this driver's side door here with the horribly rusted hinges and the considerable amount of play in there, which is why the door panel is completely ruined. Because as the door got harder and harder to close, because what it does is it droops and starts hitting the striker too hard, of course wearing off the plastic. Just like with the check engine light, the guy just kept closing it harder and harder and harder, until finally it stressed out the door panel enough that even it gave out. So it's really kind of sad that that the car was allowed to just basically accumulate a series of problems just because absolutely zero maintenance was done on this thing. Maybe oil changes, and I use that term lightly, I guess. I'm not sure if he changed the oil at all. But, you know, it's just a sad commentary. One little simple problem like that for the vacuum lines being reversed, and a drooping door that could have taken just 2 squirts of WD-40 or some spray grease or anything like that to fix that, and the car would be in much better shape just through regular preventive maintenance. And it's also kind of interesting to see when you start taking a car down to this level, getting into every little nook and cranny like this, and you have a keen eye and you make observations like this, you can basically have this car talk to you, and without even talking to the owner, come up with what kind of life this thing had. Although you can probably get a glance of the interior and see what kind of life it had, but it looks like this car was just never maintained. They put gas in it, and that's pretty much about it. And unfortunately, that's the case for a lot of cars these days. And people wonder why the cars break down and eventually fail, and then they get like, well, I don't want to buy another Ford again, that thing crapped out on me. Well, you pretty much have to maintain these things just like any car. That engine over there gave every last breath that it could and ran as long as it could under those conditions. I'm unsure what the long-term effects of the EGR not functioning are. What that's going to do is it's going to cause higher peak flame temperatures, because what that's supposed to do is reduce those temperatures to reduce oxides of nitrogen. So we know that the combustion temperatures in this engine were much higher than they were designed to be, and that's definitely not good for it. So it gave everything that it could, and finally crapped out at 140,000 miles, I think. But that's okay, because I've got this 13,000 mile 4.6 in here, and I'm not about to let anything happen to it. And I'm almost done with everything. I've got to make sure that I tighten up the cooling fan on here. That's not super critical. As you can tell, the belt is reversed around that pulley, so the pulley turns counterclockwise, so it's going to act to tighten up the fan. It's a right-hand fan. But I still have to find a way to block that pulley and tighten that bolt down good and snug like it should be. And just go ahead and add the fluids, flush the system, and hopefully very, very soon come do an initial startup with this thing and just kind of see where I'm at with it. Make sure the engine's running, make sure I've got no check engine light, and make sure I've got no fluid leaks. and then last but not least go ahead and get these body panels adjusted. If for some reason I have a major problem, I don't want to have adjusted all these body panels and gotten them perfect and then for some reason have to take them off again to fix a problem way down deep in the engine someplace. I'd rather know now than later. So anyway, that's just a quick status update of where things are and a quick lesson in, I guess you could say, automotive forensics, trying to look at all the clues and see what kind of life this thing had. And the next video will be you'll see hopefully this 4.6 running again.